Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven and this is the Storytime channel. Today we've got some pro-revenge stories and our first story of the day is by Solo1961. Deny me workers' comp? Paybacks are a blank. While reading the many pleasurable stories of pro-revenge, I was reminded of an act of pro-revenge from several years ago. It was a bad year for me and the economy was not in great shape. Unemployment was fairly high. I had been working at a hardware store, but things went bad and the owner sold everything and moved to Florida. I finally landed a job at a factory. It was crappy work involving putting zinc plating on metal parts. The owner was all about profit and had little regard for worker safety. Somehow he'd get a heads up on whenever an OSHA inspector was coming. We'd bust butt cleaning, installing safety equipment on the machinery, etc. Once the inspector left, the safety equipment was put back in storage so there would be no wear and tear on it. I suffered through it all, as did my coworkers, because we were young, had no skills or experience, and jobs were scarce. One day, the piece of machinery I used, think of something that looks like a concrete mixer, broke while I was loading it with the parts. The drum fell, hitting the bucket I was holding. The bucket was full of metal parts and weighed somewhere around 80 pounds when it was full. This caused me to lose my balance and ultimately injured my back. I tried to tough it out, but I was in a lot of pain. I go tell the foreman. She leaves the floor and finds the owner. She comes back about 10 minutes later and tells me to clock out and go home. I'm young and naive. I know nothing about workers' comp. I spent a few hundred of my own money going to a chiropractor and finally to a doctor. When I go back to work a couple days later, I am informed that I have been demoted due to my injury. I am relegated to being a custodian, and my hourly pay had been cut. I held on for a few months before quitting and moving on. Here's the pro-revenge. It's a few years later. I have graduated college, got a good job, and am a little older and wiser. I come home from work and am watching the evening news. The state I live in has an office similar to the EPA. The news station did one of those human interest stories and interviewed the man who investigated the illegal environmental stuff. The story was about how he had dropped the bomb on a corporation that had been illegally dumping zinc waste. My ears perked up. You see, that company I used to work for used zinc to plate their little metal parts. Lots of zinc. My workstation with that drum? My job was to fill it with the metal parts and then fill the drum with a zinc water acid slurry. Once the parts were plated, guess what the next part of my job was? I dumped the slurry into a trough which led to a hole in the wall of the factory, which led to a ditch, which led to a creek. The factory had been illegally dumping zinc waste into a ditch. I immediately got in my car and drove there. Aha! The factory was still in business and they were still dumping the zinc waste into a creek. I took pictures, I took video. And then I turned it all in along with a notarized affidavit to that state inspector. The original fine was in excess of $100,000. They appealed and I don't know what the settlement entailed. The business closed shortly after. Sweet revenge. Let me ask you guys, let's say theoretically you were working at a place and you were making solid enough money to live comfortably enough. If you caught wind that they were doing illegal dumping activities, would you still go against it and report them to the environmental services? Let me know what you would do in that dilemma in the comments down below. Our next story is by IamWeasel93, Debt from the Grave, a story of money. My grandma told me this story recently about how her brother got his butt kicked from the grave. So this is the scenario. My grandma comes from a family of 5, 4 girls, 1 boy. My great-grandfather Hank was ecstatic with the boy. We will call him Jack. One more important thing is that my great-grandfather ran a very successful company that made high-end clothing and bathroom silks, towels, bathrobes. He made a fortune with his company and made sure everyone who worked for the company got his fair share. He also looked after the family. All his children got an education. All his children got the chance to get their driver's license. It was in the 1960s, so it was a big deal back then. They were the first in my hometown with a car, radio, and TV. My great-grandfather treated everyone equal. That changed when his first and only son was born. He had already had 4 girls and now finally a son. The roadmap was laid out for him. He would be the heir to his company. So began the upbringing of Jack. He was, let's say, a kid with a mouth. This wasn't bad per se, the thing was that his father allowed it. Jack got kicked from his first school, Jack got caught for shoplifting, Jack got kicked from his second school, Jack got caught joyriding, and so on and so on. Hank did not sit Jack down and told him the severity of his actions, but he would shrug it off and tell his wife, great-grandmother, Anna, that it was just childhood quirks. Anna tried to make something out of Jack, but it was a lost cause. Jack became 18, and Hank decided that it was time to introduce him into the company. The company did better than ever, and the whole family was involved. Jack began at the bottom of the ladder and had to work his way up. This is where Jack began to shine. By shine, my grandmother meant that her brother was not a bright light at school, but he was a hard worker and had a nose for business, not so much for people. Jack was being a jerk as per usual and got married to his first Karen. His first wife was a Karen. She wanted to start her own company and her father-in-law Hank wanted to retire. She pushed Jack to take over quickly and pushed the rest of the family out. Jack listened to her and talked to his father about how he was ready and how his sisters and their husbands were tearing the company apart if they would stay in their leadership roles. The thing was that only one daughter and son-in-law were involved in the company at this point, 1980. My grandmother oversaw the seamstresses and the quality department, and my grandfather oversaw the financial and the suppliers. Karen wanted full control and started a little fire in the family. She spread a rumor that grandfather stole from the company. I do not know what transpired, but in the end, my great-grandfather bought out all the family and Jack bought out great-grandfather. The company was Jack and Karen's company now, and things went tits up pretty quickly. Seamstresses quit, bills were not paid, and Jack had to take a loan from great-grandfather. The family company was barely scraping by, and Karen left Jack because he could not provide for them. It became apparent that Jack could not make it work and was looking for a way out. After a while, great-grandfather had seen enough and bought back the remnants of his company and sold it to a bigger company that wanted to expand. This made the wealth he amassed even bigger. He did set up different banking accounts for his children and said that if someone was in need, they could take money from that account. He told Jack his cut was smaller as he was the reason he sold the company and that he was let down by the carelessness his son had run his company into the ground with. Jack was angry and told his father that he could have made it work if he had more time. It remained a sour point between the two of them. Things went well for a while, but Jack married a second time with a woman named Helen. Helen, like Karen, wanted her own business. Jack agreed and took money from the account in order to start Helen's company. The business was a little barber shop and ran pretty well. They were spending their money on luxury and did not save any money. After a while, my grandmother got a call from her little brother Jack if he could store some goods in her garage. My grandfather did not trust Jack and told him no, and grandmother did not agree, but they agreed to it. A few weeks later, Jack got caught for possession of stolen goods and drug smuggling. It was not a surprise, but nonetheless a letdown for my great-grandfather Hank. This time he would not help Jack and told him that he would no longer stand behind him. After a few years, Jack got out and was a divorced man. He married again and divorced another 3 times, and each time he gave these women a business and lived lavishly. New cars, big houses, expensive vacations. He drained his money and robbed his emergency bank account dry. He loaned a lot of money from great-grandfather and so on. In 2013, great-grandfather fell ill. It was clear that he was not going to make it and took his final days in stride. At this time, Jack became very buddy-buddy and started to help great-grandfather sell some stuff. At some point, my grandmother sat down with her father and asked him where the money went for the sold stuff, and great-grandfather told her not to worry about it. He took care of it in his will. After his 95th birthday, he passed away quiet and in peace. After his funeral, they all went to listen to the will of their father, all except Jack, who had given power of attorney to my grandmother to sign the will in his place. All the children get their fair share, but at the end, the notary publicly tells them to sign the papers and the inheritance is completely theirs. At some point, my grandma called my dad. She has inherited some collateral papers. all sorts of papers that stated that someone owed my great-grandfather money. My father said that she has to call a lawyer's office to get the money from these papers. A few days after this call to the lawyer's office, my grandmother gets a call from her brother. Why was she taking his money from the inheritance? My grandmother tells him she has inherited some collateral papers and that she wants to get the money from them. Jack was furious and told her that that was illegal. Jack was wrong. Great-grandfather had documented every penny his son had loaned from him and constructed his will in such a way that the rest of his children could get that part of their money from their money drain of a brother. Also, great-grandfather found out Jack stole from him. You see, Jack was putting the money he made from the sold stuff on his own banking account instead of giving it to his father. After this ordeal, Jack has not contacted my mother or his sisters. He has since then paid everything back and has never seen a penny from his inheritance. Great-grandfather has confided in a letter why he did this. He was done with his son, all the lying, the careless things he had done to his company, all the money he had blown, and not taking any responsibility. He gave his final lesson to his son from the grave. It sure sounds like Jack was kinda busy there. What is that, 4+ marriages? And each time he did the absolutely same thing, and surprise, surprise, it was the same outcome? Jack should have learned the definition of insanity a little bit quicker. And our final story of the day is by isickoo, How I Got Revenge on a Bully's Brother. Sorry if this story is a bit short. It's a pretty good story though. So, a few years ago in my neighborhood we had 2 kids. One in 5th grade and one in 2nd or 3rd grade. I can't remember. The 5th grader will be known as Jerk, and his little brother will be Jerk's brother. He was not really a jerk. My friend will be Friend, and I will be I. Jerk really cared about Jerk's brother and protected him like he was everything. In our neighborhood, we had a little island of prairie. We live in Iowa, and prairies are everywhere. That split the road into 2 and back again in the entrance to our neighborhood. It had 2 trees and a sign with the name of our neighborhood on it. We get boiling summers and freezing winters, and in the winter we got a lot of snow. The snow that year was in big pieces, a bit bigger than the size of a very old TV. After we got off our bus, we started walking and talking. While we were talking, Jerk took a chunk of snow, ran across the island, and dumped it over my head. I was pissed, but I kept talking with Friend. Then Friend got dumped on, and I was even more pissed. This continued for about 2 minutes. Then Jerk's brother got in on it, and that was when I struck. My shoes, socks, pants, and shirt were wet. I had no snow pants on. And I was done with this. Jerk's brother ran across the island with a chunk of snow and stopped on the sidewalk. He froze and dropped his chunk when he saw me making a ball of snow and packing it together with all of my might. For the people who are not familiar with snow, you might not know this, but when you do what I did, it creates a heavy ball of hardness and pain if it hits you. I am a great hitter, but the worst thrower ever to play baseball. So when I threw it, it missed. And hit him square in the freaking nuts. Luck had granted me a nut shot. Everyone's head turned. I saw the life drain from his face. I still think back to him dropping to his knees and covering his groin and smile. I had a new problem now. His brother. He did what was basically a bull charge from Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Great game, and no, I am not a 45-year-old. He tackled me, and Friend had to pull me away from his weak punches. He doesn't punch like a bald bull, that's for sure. I bolted to my driveway and caught my breath with Friend in tow. We chatted for a second, and I walked inside, and I celebrated my victory against Jerk. Jerk is no longer a jerk, and we get along. He moved away sadly, and I miss him. He was fun when we got along. Also, I feel bad for Jerk's brother because he just followed Jerk's orders. Lesson of the story: don't make me cold, wet, and pissed at the same time. Well, I think some people might be into that last description. Was that joke a little bit too much? I don't know. It kind of gave me Christmas Story vibes in a way. And although it was a story of a bully and a bully's little brother, it was also a success story, and in the end, you became friends with the bully and seemed like good friends, or at least it was fun to be around them. So overall, it was a pretty satisfying story. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So if you enjoyed the stories today, let me know which one was your personal favorite and why in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, please like this video and subscribe and turn notifications on, because anything you do helps this channel grow so much more. So no matter what you do, whether it was just watching the video, liking, subscribing, thank you all so very much for supporting me right here on the Storytime channel. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time right here.